It has been over 7 years since I first posted my first wheat growing video back in 2017. And the wheat that I was reporting on back then had been sown in or planted in October of 2016 and harvested in June of 2017. That wheat was a heritage wheat, yes, but it was called Turkey red wheat, which is actually a heritage wheat from the Midwest, or well, somewhere around Kansas or something like that, I believe. I live in the southeastern United States, specifically in northern South Carolina. Don't let that confuse you. And when I had figured out to myself that I wanted to grow a heritage wheat, I did not want to grow a Midwestern heritage wheat. I wanted to grow a South Carolina heritage wheat. The last words that I spoke in that 2017 wheat video were, "I've already ordered my seed." And I intend to use this video to explain what I meant. I'm going to start by answering the question why. Why am I doing this project? There's several things. One of them, it's really hinging on this idea now that so many doctors, so many clinicians and dietitians are saying that wheat is bad for you. And that's crazy to me. Western civilization was successful largely because of the cultivation and propagation of wheat. And biblical references to wheat and bread are extremely numerous. I don't think I even have to explain that one, but I mean, think about how many times you'll hear references to separating the wheat and the chaff, or references to the threshing floor. Just think about the Last Supper. They broke bread and drank wine. I mean, literally, bread was the representation of Christ's body. So, I mean, it's kind of weird for me to think about it now in terms of, oh yeah, it's junk food now. It's ruining your body. It's causing you all kinds of health problems. So, like, where did we go wrong? What the heck did we do to wheat?
Hundreds of years ago, we were eating gluten, we were eating wheat, and we didn't see the levels of autoimmunity, we didn't see the levels of celiac disease that we do now. Is the world overreacting to this gluten issue? Is it a fad, or is there something there?
Obviously, I'm not the only person that's thinking about this or trying to figure out what went wrong. Now, when I think of making bread, I have to think of it in terms of three separate processes. The first process is planting the wheat and harvesting the wheat. So literally putting a seed in the ground. It's the whole process of farming the wheat. Step two, I think, is the process of turning wheat berries into flour. And so there's just not much more to it. You just have a grinding process. Probably the quickest process and the shortest one of these that there is. The third process, the way I'm thinking about it, is in taking flour and making bread. And that's the part that's done in the kitchen. So when we think about the process of wheat or turning it into bread, or this is the whole bread making process. If our aim is to make bread healthy again, where do we start? We start all the way back in step one that I've just laid out. And not only just in step one, we go all the way to the front of step one and choosing which seed, what variety, what wheat we're going to grow. And we make sure that we got that right. And then we move through this process to make sure that the wheat is grown as originally grown as humanly possible, back to the time when wheat was not bad for us. You can consider this project a total wheat reset, which starts from the variety. And this video is about explaining what variety, how it was chosen. I admit that I have future videos to make, which include the method in which I grow wheat, which is all still in step one. I've got multiple videos just regarding step one. We start back with the variety of wheat. If there's any question at all about modern wheat, is it possible, is it even slightly possible that we have actually screwed up wheat itself, like the variety, like the type we're growing? Yes, it is. Actually, that's a valid point. So that's why we start there.
Wheat was changed in the 1950s, and they changed the wheat to create a plant with a high yield of grain. But in that hybridization process of creating a plant with a high yield of grain, they also adjusted a few areas that of course they didn't mean to. It was just part of the hybridization process. It was rushed through with no safety studies. It changed the starch structure. So this starch structure gets the blood sugar level up high even than refined sugar. That explains the mushrooming epidemic we've got of diabetes. It also changed the gluten or the protein structure into a structure that's very difficult to digest. So there's your celiacs, there's your gluten intolerances. And if someone has an allergy to the hybridized wheat, which is quite common because of the way it was changed, there will be excess mucus produced.
Determining that wheat is no longer good for us is just one part of the equation for why I'm doing this in reality. Another part is that I am involved quite a bit in history in my local area, and I was surprised to find out just how important wheat was to the local economy around here. Economically, wheat and corn dominated local agriculture. The price of flour rose from $5.55 a barrel in 1791 to $9.35 by 1795. These prices held until the end of the War of 1812. So on the one hand, like I mentioned, we've got the fact that modern wheat sucks and heritage wheat might be good. It might help answer the problem of why we think wheat is bad for us now. That's part one of my interest in this project. Part two is that there's a historical connection back to my ancestors who came here in the 1780s and started to settle this area and grew wheat. And I know they did because there are copies of letters they wrote back and forth talking about their crop in the 1820s that we still have. So I'm going to start with what heritage wheat to get. And I'm going to break that down further into two things. Number one is when to get it from, and then what time period to get it from, and then what actual varieties to get. And to help visualize this selection of the heritage year, I'm going to use a timeline. So rightfully, a timeline expressing heritage wheat from where I'm from is probably going to start somewhere around 1775 on the left-hand side, and of course it's going to go to modern era, or the current year, on the right-hand side. And the reason I start at 1775 is in my particular county, there was no settlement until after the Revolutionary War. We can know that cultivation really didn't start occurring until 1780. So on the top end, the more recent end, we know that we can eliminate some of these years, actually some of these decades, because it has been theorized by some that modern wheat is bad for us. So I think it would be safe to say we can exclude all the years since the rise of gluten intolerance and celiac disease, and even probably more than likely further back than that. For starters, I'm going to go with Barbara O'Neill's suggestion here of
Wheat was changed in the 1950s.
Start with that, to take everything from 1950 to modern time and just remove that from consideration. And so there's this large span here of more than 150 years. Back to the left-hand side of this timeline. When wheat first started getting planted in this area, it was probably, or it had to have been brought in from somewhere else where it may have been acclimatized or acclimated to that area, to that growing pressure, to the farming demands, insect, disease, drought. But when it gets here in this area, it has to re-acclimatize. It has to reacclimate itself to the conditions here. And that takes time. In each year that it goes through something, genetic material is added to that seed. At least that's the theory. That's exactly what selective breeding is. You naturally selective breed when you just start growing a crop in an area year after year. So the further you push the timeline to the right, the more genetic benefits you get from this wheat having been grown year after year in this area. And there's a lot of benefit to that. that we don't want to lose, that we want to capture. So just to give it a nice whole round number, I've decided that it would be great to have at least 100 years of genetic selective breeding right here in my area. And so if wheat first started getting cultivated around here in the 1780s, then I would like to get seed that is at least from the 1880s or forward. On the top end of this timeline, or the more modern end, again, we just have the pressures of the modernization or the mechanization of wheat. Some of them we still to this moment do not understand. And it's entirely possible that there's absolutely nothing wrong with the wheat that we're eating now. There's something else in the environment that's changing that. And I have to admit that. It's not going to stop me from experimenting, at least trying this out. At least it hasn't stopped me in 8 years of trying. Whatever those factors are, they're like a downward pressure. We don't know exactly when they stop. We don't know the exact era that we should probably pull from. But generally speaking, the further back in history that we go, the more separated we get from both hybridized wheat and chemical dependency and petroleum fertilizers, chemical pesticides, whatever else. Those are the things that are guiding this red arrow back to the left. From the left to the right, there's benefit in waiting longer because you get this genetic coding in each seed. From the right to the left, there is potential detriment in that hybridization or chemicalization or mechanization or whatever else. To sum all this up, I have selected the time period between 1880, as I've already explained, on the left-hand side of this timeline. And at the right side, the limiting year is 1925, with some pretty good evidence that that's a safe year to assume that the industrial age began to have its way with wheat grown in my area, and probably elsewhere, but certainly my area. Here we have this 45-year period that I am selecting. This is entirely the function of and the product of my thoughts based on research that I have done. This is not coming from someone else. This is entirely my idea about this project. And so what it's saying is that I need to first figure out what types of wheat or what varieties of wheat grew between that time period, and then figure out a source of the seed of those varieties and from that time period. How hard could that be? All I can say is I thank God for the country I live in, United States of America. So where does that come from? Where is that little injection of patriotism coming from? It's because we wrote things down several generations ago, way back when. We wrote things down. We studied things and we published our findings. And we studied things that we knew not very many people would think were all that interesting, but we did it for posterity. Let me introduce you to this book, about 100 years old. This book probably never sold more than 100 copies. I don't know, maybe more. It's called Classification of American Wheat Varieties. That's right, Classification of American Wheat Varieties by a Mr. Clark, a Mr. Ball, and a Mr. Martin. It was published in 1922. A perfect year for this to become my manual in discovering what wheat varieties I needed to include in my project. The book meticulously describes wheat varieties that grew throughout America, including the ones that were by 1922 still growing in the southeastern United States. The book even included distribution maps, so I could tell not only if this particular variety grew in South Carolina, but if it grew in my area of South Carolina. So the timeline helped me determine the date range for which I should focus my project on. The book helped me determine what wheat varieties grew in my local area during that date range. I still needed to find a source of seed. And that happened once I stumbled upon what's called a seed bank. Now, this particular seed bank was a part of, I guess, the precursor, the predecessor of the modern USDA. I'm talking about seed that was literally grown in, for example, 1903 and harvested in 1904 and then donated. And so it's been kept for 120 years in a vault somewhere. So once I had the knowledge and even a place to get the seed, I looked through the book and the seed bank to make sure that I had 8 varieties that were a match, that were both in the book and grew in my area during that time period, and that the seed bank had. There were some maybe that I wanted more than others that the seed bank didn't have, and others that I hadn't really thought about that were in the book, but that the seed bank had available. Anyway, it came down to 8 varieties. I sent off my petition, my request to get a sample of them. And then I just waited. And I remember the day they came in the mail, I was like Ralphie from A Christmas Story, the day he got the Little Orphan Annie decoder pen or whatever, and then ran to the bathroom and shut out the rest of the world while he looked at it. That was kind of the moment I had, I guess. But I mean, you get 5 grams of seed. That's it. It's a very small amount. It fits in the inner part of the palm of your hand. And so I realized very early on that this was going to require a long grow out period. And I've kept up with a little bit of that in the comment section of that first 2017 video. But that's where I'm at. I mean, I've had a lot of failure. I'm not going to lie. It didn't need to take this long. Yes, it'll take a while to grow out that small of an amount of seed in order to be able to both plant, let's say, just 2 to 5 acres and have plenty enough to sell, to make bread and that kind of thing. But it didn't need to take as long as it did for me. I will go over in a future video just how frequently I goofed things up and utterly failed at this project and almost threw the whole thing out. We'll get into that later. But the point is that this video is really just trying to say, back in 2016, 2017, zeroed in on what I wanted to do with this project. And I've just covered for you the why, the how, and the what, I guess. I don't know, something like that. Either way, the next video I'm going to talk about is specifically the manner in which I grow wheat, because that is just as important as making sure you have the right wheat. So I'll see you then. Hopefully it won't take 7 years to do that.